Eleanor sat at her kitchen table long after the rest of the neighborhood had gone quiet, the clock ticking softly in the corner. She had just finished organizing the last of the travel kits she had prepared for her grandchildren. Small zippered pouches with sunscreen, motion sickness bands, and little keychains she had picked up online that said "Aloha, Grandma loves you." Her hands were sticky from tape and ribbon when the phone buzzed beside her. She reached for it, expecting a simple reminder from Daniel about flight times or perhaps a thank you. Instead, the glowing screen showed a message she read twice, then 3 times, as though repetition might change its meaning. "You won't be joining us. My wife prefers it to be just her family. You've already done your part by paying." The words landed like stones in her chest. At first there was confusion. Surely this was a mistake, a clumsy joke, or perhaps some misunderstanding that would be clarified in the next message. But no correction came. Only silence. She waited, staring at the screen until it dimmed, then placed the phone face down on the table as if the darkness could erase the words. Eleanor looked around the quiet kitchen, the counters still smelling faintly of lemon polish from her earlier cleaning. For months she had lived with the anticipation of this trip, saving, planning, building toward a reunion she believed would draw the family together again. The villa was booked, the flights confirmed, the activities arranged down to the last. The kitchen felt colder than it had minutes before, though nothing had changed but Eleanor's heart. She sat motionless, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, her glasses sliding low on her nose as she stared at the wooden table. The message replayed in her mind with cruel clarity, every word cutting into the dream she had cradled for so long. 3 years. That was how long she had been planning. 3 years of saving every spare dollar, tutoring late into the night despite aching joints, refusing small comforts so she could tuck away money into what she called her dream fund. It had started as loose bills folded into an old mason jar behind the flour tin and slowly grew into a proper account, each deposit a promise to herself that one day, the family would stand together in Hawaii. The trip was never just about beaches or luau's. It was about healing, about memory. She wanted Daniel to walk on the same sand where his father, James, once held her hand on their honeymoon. She imagined her grandchildren running barefoot along the shoreline, laughing as she told them stories of the man they had never met but who had loved them long before they were born. She pictured evenings at the villa, everyone gathered at a long table under lantern light, candles flickering as they shared stories of family. Eleanor closed her eyes, and in the darkness of her thoughts, the text message unfolded into a pattern she could no longer ignore. The truth had not arrived suddenly. It had been whispering to her for years in the quiet emissions, in the small, calculated ways she was pushed to the edges of her own family. She remembered the first Thanksgiving after Daniel married Claire. Instead of hosting at her house as she always had, Eleanor received a cheerful call informing her that the holiday would be at Claire's mother's place. The decision had been made before anyone asked if Eleanor minded, and by the time she was invited, the menu was set, the seating arranged. She had smiled politely, agreeing to bring a pie, but she felt her role shrinking from host to afterthought. Christmas was worse. One year, Daniel, Claire, and the children appeared in matching red sweaters decorated with white trees. Eleanor's sweater, blue and plain, stood out awkwardly in the photos. She hadn't even known there was a plan for coordinated outfits. Later, Claire brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh, we didn't think you want to dress up for something silly like that." And then there were the photographs. At first, it seemed harmless. Claire gathering the kids for a snapshot, Daniel joining them, Claire's parents stepping in. But as the years passed, Eleanor noticed that by the time the group shots were done, no one remembered to include her. When she finally asked, the silence of the kitchen carried Eleanor backward, past the sting of rejection, into years when love between her and Daniel had been simple, unquestioned, and pure. She could still see his small hands tugging at hers when he was a boy, leading her across the street with all the authority of a child certain his mother was the safest person in the world. There had been Mother's Day cards scrawled in uneven handwriting, each one a treasure. One still lived in her desk drawer, a paper tulip with the words, "My mom is my best friend." She had read it so many times the edges were worn thin, yet every time it brought her back to that little boy who meant it with all his heart. She remembered the spring mornings when Daniel would surprise her with pink tulips, the flower he somehow knew she loved most. Even after he left for college, he would call each March, promising she'd find tulips waiting on her porch. And she always did. One night in second grade, Daniel had returned from school with a drawing. Crayon colors filled the page, a stick figure in a cape, smiling, standing tall above the world. Beneath it he had written, "My mom saves the day." She had pinned it to the refrigerator for years, proud of the way he saw her, not as ordinary, but as a hero. Now those memories. Eleanor's eyes drifted to the small duffel bag by the door, its zipper neatly drawn, its contents chosen with tender care. Inside were 2 sundresses she hadn't worn in years, a wide-brimmed hat, and her comfortable sandals. But what mattered most wasn't clothing. It was the little treasures she had packed for a moment she had imagined countless times. Wrapped carefully in soft cloth was a framed photograph of James, her late husband. In the picture, he was laughing, his head tilted back, the sun catching in his hair. She had planned to set it on the villa's dining table, so he could be with them in spirit. Alongside it, she had placed a lavender candle, his favorite scent, meant to be lit on the beach during a family memorial. She pictured them all barefoot in the sand, each holding a candle while the waves whispered at their feet. She had imagined Daniel's children asking about their grandfather, giving her the chance to tell stories that kept his memory alive. Every detail of the trip had been her doing. The beachfront villa with enough beds for everyone. The flights booked months in advance. The luau tickets, the snorkeling lessons, even the breakfast baskets arranged for the glow of the laptop screen lit Eleanor's face as she sat in the dimly lit den, her fingers resting on the keyboard. She opened the folder labeled Hawaii Travel Fund, a title she had typed 3 years earlier with a mixture of hope and pride. The balance stared back at her, $21,763.84. Every cent was a piece of her life, carved out with quiet sacrifice. It had begun humbly, with a mason jar tucked behind the flour tin in her kitchen cupboard. Each time she skipped a small indulgence, a new pair of slippers, a box of her favorite tea, she folded the bills neatly and slipped them inside. At first it was $5 here, $10 there, but over time it grew. Soon the jar gave way to a savings account, and Eleanor found new ways to add to it. She sold furniture she no longer needed. She took on late-night tutoring sessions, her eyes burning from the glow of the screen, her joints aching from long hours in the chair. She canceled cable. She turned down invitations from friends, politely saying it had been a tight month. What they didn't know was that each declined lunch, each skipped movie ticket, was another small step toward her dream. She had imagined herself not only giving her family a vacation but also creating a memory that would last beyond her lifetime. But as she looked at the account now, the truth pressed down on her. To Daniel and Claire, the fund wasn't a symbol of love or devotion. It wasn't years of her life stitched into numbers on a screen. To them, it was. The cursor blinked steadily on the banking page, a small pulse of light that seemed to echo Eleanor's own heartbeat. Her eyes fixed on the option before her, freeze account. A single click would stop every transaction, halt every card connected to the fund, unraveling the trip before it ever began. Her hand hovered over the mouse. It felt impossible, almost unthinkable, to undo years of careful planning with such a simple action. This account had been her lifeline of hope, the vessel carrying 3 years of sacrifice and longing. Freezing it would not only strip Daniel and Claire of their carefully packed plans, but also end the dream Eleanor had been chasing for so long. She hesitated, her chest tightening. Was this revenge? Was this bitterness? She had never seen herself as a woman who took back what she gave, but then again, had she truly given, if what they wanted was only her money and not her presence? Her eyes shifted from the glowing screen to the notepad on her desk. Earlier that evening, she had begun jotting names almost without thinking, names of women she knew who, like her, had been pushed to the margins of their own families. Carol, who hadn't left the state since her cancer diagnosis. Frances, who raised grandchildren but wasn't invited to their milestones. Beverly, who once confessed that no one had ever taken her picture on a beach. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. Eleanor sat at her desk, the lamp casting a warm but lonely circle of light across the paper before her. She held a pen loosely in her hand, staring at the blank page as though waiting for it to speak first. Then, slowly, she began to write. Names came to her one by one, each carrying a story of quiet endurance. Carol, her dear friend from church, whose son had stopped visiting after her illness, leaving her to spend holidays alone. Frances, who had raised her grandchildren while her own children chased other lives, and who had never been invited to a single graduation or wedding. Beverly, who spent years caring for her brother with dementia, only to fade into the background of every family photo. Louise, newly widowed, still setting two places at the table as though her husband might walk through the door. She paused, her pen hovering as the ink smudged faintly. Each name was a reminder that she was not the only one carrying the invisible weight of being forgotten. Each woman had given until there was nothing left to give, only to find themselves cast aside when their usefulness was spent. For the first time since Daniel's message arrived, Eleanor felt something other than shame or sorrow. She felt clarity. This trip was never meant. Eleanor set her phone face down on the table, the screen dark and quiet. The urge to respond, to defend herself, to demand an explanation from Daniel had burned hot at first, but it faded quickly, replaced by something steadier. Silence. She realized that words would change nothing. If she begged, it would only confirm what they already believed, that her presence was optional, her value negotiable. If she confronted them with anger, they would twist it into proof that she was difficult, that excluding her was justified. But silence, that was different. Silence had weight. Silence left space for truth to reveal itself without her having to lift a hand. For 2 days she went about her routines as though nothing had happened. She watered the geraniums on the porch, folded laundry with slow precision, and brewed her peppermint tea in the evenings. The lavender candle remained on the counter, unlit but waiting, a reminder of what could have been. She said nothing to Daniel, nothing to Claire. When Tanya posted a cheerful family photo online of their matching beach hats lying neatly on the sofa, Eleanor didn't comment. When Daniel sent a quick note in the family chat about packing the kids' swimsuits, she didn't reply. She resisted the temptation to remind them of snacks or sunscreen, of the little things she had always been relied upon to remember. She would not remind. She would not warn, because she knew what awaited them at the airport, the moment when their confidence met reality, when the morning of their flight dawned bright and clear in Los Angeles. Daniel and Claire, brimming with confidence, shepherded the children through the sliding glass doors of the airport. Their matching luggage rolled smoothly behind them, the children's excitement bubbling over in squeals about sea turtles and sandy beaches. Claire's parents walked ahead, chatting about the villa as if it already belonged to them. Everything seemed perfect. Check-in was routine until the first swipe of the card. A polite beep, then a frown from the attendant. Another swipe. The same result. Claire leaned in, whispering sharply to Daniel, who forced a smile and tried a second card. Declined. A third. Declined. The family's excitement began to falter. The children grew restless, tugging at their backpacks while Claire's mother crossed her arms, her voice sharp with irritation. Daniel's forehead glistened with sweat as he tried to keep his tone calm, insisting there must be a mistake. Behind them, the line of travelers grew longer, murmurs rising with impatience. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table hundreds of miles away, the chipped mug of coffee warming her hands. Her phone buzzed once, then again. Daniel's name lit the screen. She turned it over. Moments later, another buzz, Claire this time, followed by Daniel again. Voicemails began to pile up, each more. By late afternoon, the unraveling was complete. What had once been a carefully woven dream, stitched together with Eleanor's sacrifices, now came apart thread by thread. First came the airline. A curt email arrived in Eleanor's inbox. Payment authorization failed. Reservation canceled. funds reversed to the original account holder. The polite tone only sharpened the blow, stripping Daniel and Claire of the certainty they had carried to the gate. Then the villa followed. The booking agency confirmed in equally measured language that the beachfront home was no longer secured. The reservation, the deposit, the upgrades, all dissolved in a single line. Per the account holder's authority, all charges have been cancelled. One by one, the dominoes fell. Excursion tickets voided. Rental car bookings undone. The luau, the snorkeling lessons, the lays, all gone, all refunded, all returned to Eleanor's name. At the airport, Daniel's calls grew more desperate, his voice a mix of confusion and rising anger. Claire, her cheeks flushed, tried to manage appearances in front of her parents, but the tension in her clipped tone betrayed her. The children, restless and bewildered, clung to their parents' hands, asking questions that went unanswered. Meanwhile, in a quiet kitchen hundreds of miles away, Eleanor poured herself a cup of peppermint tea. The first notification arrived 2 days later, a soft chime from Eleanor's phone as she sorted laundry in the den. She glanced at the screen. Refund issued, Pacific Airlines. A small reversal, the kind that usually went unnoticed. But she knew it was only the beginning. By evening, another appeared. Villa Hale Moana, reservation cancelled. Full refund processed. She paused, her breath catching as she read the words twice, then 3 times. The beachfront home she had once dreamed of filling with her family was gone, but so was the weight of having paid for people who never wanted her there. The next day, the stream continued. The snorkeling lessons, the luau package, the lay greeting at the airport, even the deposit for the private chef. One by one, each refund trickled back into the account she had built with years of sacrifice. What had once been drained dry by misplaced love was now filling again, dollar by dollar, until the balance stood whole before her eyes. Eleanor stared at the number on the screen, her heart strangely steady. For so long, that account had been tied to longing, to her desperate hope of pulling the family together, of proving she still belonged. Now, looking at the restored total, she realized it represented something else entirely. Independence. She was no longer the silent financier, no longer the invisible presence funding memories she would never share. The money was hers again, yes. The idea came to Eleanor quietly, almost like a whisper she had been waiting to hear. For days she had sat with her list of names, women who, like her, had been overlooked, set aside, or forgotten by the very families they had given everything to. The paper rested on her desk, each name written in her careful script: Carol, Frances, Nora, Beverly, Denise, and Louise. One by one, she picked up the phone. Carol answered first, her voice hesitant. When Eleanor explained the offer, a week in Hawaii, all expenses paid, there was stunned silence on the other end. Then, a shaky laugh. Me? Eleanor, no one's ever invited me on a trip like that. Are you sure? Eleanor's eyes softened. I'm sure. Pack a swimsuit. Frances cried quietly when she heard the invitation. She confessed she hadn't left her hometown in years, too busy raising grandchildren who no longer had time for her. I don't even remember what the ocean looks like, she whispered. Then it's time you do, Eleanor replied. Nora was next. She chuckled at first, thinking Eleanor was joking. But when she realized it was real, her voice broke. No one's written to me in over a decade. And now you're calling with this? Why me? Eleanor answered softly. Because someone should. Beverly gasped so loudly Eleanor had to pull the phone from her ear. She had spent her life caring for others, her brother with dementia, her nieces and nephews who seldom visited. Do you mean it? She asked over and over. Yes, Beverly, Eleanor reassured her. The villa overlooked the ocean, its wide windows opening to the rhythm of waves against the shore. As Eleanor unlocked the door and stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of salt and hibiscus, a scent that wrapped around her like a welcome. Behind her, 6 women followed slowly, each carrying a mixture of disbelief and quiet wonder on their faces. Carol gasped first, her scarf fluttering as she turned in circles, taking in the view. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. Frances pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling as she gazed out at the endless blue horizon. Beverly laughed nervously, almost as if she needed permission to believe she truly belonged here. They wandered through the villa together, past airy bedrooms with crisp linens, a long wooden dining table glowing under hanging lanterns, and a terrace that opened directly to the sea. Their footsteps echoed with a sound of awe, like children seeing the world anew. That evening, Eleanor unpacked the last item from her bag, the framed photo of James. She carried it to the dining table, placing it at the center without ceremony, without explanation. His familiar smile caught the candlelight, steady and warm. The other women glanced at it, then at her, and simply nodded. No one asked her to move it aside. On the first night, Eleanor brought out a small box she had tucked carefully into her suitcase. Inside were 7 lavender candles, one for each of them, and one for James. She set them on the dining table, their soft wax gleaming in the lantern light. "Each night," she said gently, her voice carrying the hush of the waves beyond the windows, "we'll light one. Not for the past, not for what we lost, but for what we still carry within us." The women exchanged quiet glances, uncertain but open. When Eleanor struck the first match, the flame flared to life and steadied. She lit James's candle and whispered, "For love that endures, even when it changes shape." The next evening, it was Carol's turn. She held the match carefully, her hands trembling. "You matter," she said softly, the words meant for herself as much as for the others. The candle glowed, and a silence of understanding settled around the table. Frances followed on the third night, her voice cracking as she lit the wick. "You are not a burden." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and Beverly reached over to hold her hand. No one rushed her. No one looked away. By the fourth night, the ritual had taken on a rhythm. Beverly lit her candle and said, "You are seen." Nora added, "You don't have to." The night was warm, the sand cool beneath Eleanor's bare feet as she and the women walked slowly along the shoreline. The moon hung low and silver above them, scattering light across the water until the waves shimmered like broken glass. The air smelled of salt and plumeria, and the sea's steady rhythm seemed to match the quiet beat of her heart. No one spoke at first. The only sound was the hush of the tide curling around their ankles, then slipping away again. Each woman carried something small, Carol with a seashell, Frances with a ribbon, Nora with a folded scrap of paper. Little tokens of memory and grief, things they were ready to release. Eleanor walked at the center, her steps measured, her body lighter than it had felt in years. She thought of the candlelight dinners, of the words spoken around the table. "You are seen. You matter. You are not a burden." Each phrase had settled into her bones, filling spaces where silence had once lived. As they reached a quiet stretch of beach, the women stopped and formed a circle. One by one, they let their tokens slip into the tide, watching the water carry them away. When it was Eleanor's turn, she knelt down and pressed her palm into the sand. She whispered not to James, not to Daniel, but to herself, "I'm not sad anymore."
And it was true.
The ache that had once pressed heavy on her chest was gone. The shame of the email arrived 3 days after Eleanor returned home, its subject line plain. "Just want to clear the air." She opened it slowly, her breath steady, her hands calm. Daniel's words filled the screen, apologies wrapped in excuses, explanations softened with blame. He admitted little, excused much, and in the end, his request was clear. Would she consider returning the money he and Claire claimed as their deposit? Eleanor read the message once, then again, her eyes resting on the sentence that asked for repayment. There was no true apology, no acknowledgement of the pain they had caused, only the same entitlement that had shadowed every decision leading up to the trip. To them, her sacrifices were still just numbers on a page. She closed the laptop gently, as though setting down a weight she no longer carried. For the first time in years, she felt no urge to defend herself, no temptation to argue, no ache for reconciliation. Love, she realized, had never meant erasing herself for others. And love without respect was no love at all. Outside, the afternoon sun lit the bird bath in the garden, scattering light across the water. A breeze stirred the wind chimes James had hung long ago, their music soft, steady, and sure. Eleanor poured herself a glass of iced tea, sat by the window, and listened. Her thoughts drifted to Hawaii, the long table of women, the glow of candles, the laughter that rose from. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please support us by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription helps us share more stories of strength, love, and resilience. Don't forget to like and subscribe.